If it wasn't for Final Fantasy, honestly, I wouldn't be the person who I am today.
Right off camera, take a seat. Camera's this way. We're gonna see each other. We're actually gonna have a visual conversation. Take a seat. You're gonna look right into the camera. All right, welcome. Everybody ready? Markers.
I lived in South Central LA for such a long time, and being in an area that doesn't have a lot of hope and somewhat back in the early 80s, that was my way to escape all the violence and everything. So I think if anything, video games kind of helped me stay astray from all the other stuff that was going around my life.
We would have to sit there and watch my dad play these video games, and you know, I loved my dad and he was my role model, and it was like, oh, I want to be like my dad. So if he's going to play video games, well, I'm going to play video games.
Just being able to have a real gaming system in my hands and able to play it whenever the TV wasn't being used, that was the most fun I ever had growing up.
I was very, I guess we'll say, socially awkward young man. My mom got me a regular Nintendo, and she noticed that when I would play with other kids, I'd have a controller and they had a controller, and she told me that was the only time that I would really kind of open up and talk to them. So I always kind of say that without video games, there's no way that I'd be where I am today.
Well, it's definitely been a huge influence for me, the Final Fantasy series, as a developer, as a fan, as a gamer, especially number 7. I think for me, that's probably like the greatest game of all time.
I have an older brother, and when we were little, our parents would host Christmas parties, and we'd kind of get locked into the basement, and we'd end up playing video games all night. One of the games I actually played when I was younger was Final Fantasy IX. It was a big bonding experience for us. Someone would take the controls, and the rest of us would watch and comment and tell the other person where to go, what we thought, all that fun stuff.
For me, like, I was kind of a weird kid and it was hard to connect to people. And then I started to get into RPGs with Final Fantasy. I liked video games a lot and my friends really didn't. And so when that game, Crystal Chronicles, came out and it was multiplayer, like, I really wanted to play it with my friends. So I actually bought an extra Game Boy Advance just so I could have like enough for everyone to play. And every day after school, we would all play together. And that really brought us closer together. I was definitely the best one. I had to kind of like tell them what to do, but like it was still lots of fun.
I think my first Final Fantasy game was Crystal Chronicles, actually, which is probably not one that's like normal. But I also had an older brother, and he was really into gaming before me, and he'd like walk me through the story, even though I was like a little kid and I didn't know what I was doing. So that was like a really good memory for me. When you're like a kid and you have like a sibling that's really, really different from you, sometimes it's hard to find common ground. So I feel like as a result of like playing games together, we sort of developed a better bond than we would have had otherwise.
For me, it was Final Fantasy VI. I think I have a huge bond with that because that was the first game I actually sat down and saw my cousins play.
Yeah.
I wasn't allowed to play their game because they're like, don't play our save file, don't use up all our Phoenix out, don't do none of that. So I remember watching them play, and it was just almost like an opera since the beginning up until the end. As I was like the guy in the back, like, yeah, you can do it, like, do the final, I want to see him do the final. Like, and so after they played it, they gave me Final Fantasy VI, and I think that was like a passing of like, they're like, they're like, here, you have the grail now, and just go with it.
I grew up in the inner city. My parents were both working class. In a middle-class family where you have children and you're working to survive in New York City, which is where I was born and raised, it was not cheap. And so video games, you can have months and months and months of entertainment. It was our time spent together, and it was our way of having fun in life.
First official Final Fantasy game I played and finished was 8. I mean, I'm a sucker for romance.
And even though I have favorites that I would much probably pick over it, if I'm gonna be stuck with one, it's gotta be Final Fantasy VIII. And even though this happened like a couple of years after, I ended up meeting my now fiance. We've been together for 15 years now. And that game is the reason we started talking.
When we were in high school, that's kind of how we clicked, was because we both played Final Fantasy VIII.
I would be drawing my fan art of like Final Fantasy characters.
I'd see that she had like you know, some Final Fantasy VIII art. I was like, oh, you played the game? And she's like,
yeah. I was super dismissive, didn't want to talk anymore. And he kept poking at it, and he's like, you like Final Fantasy? Oh, which one's your favorite? And I said 8. It's kind of funny because he doesn't like to tell it this way, but I asked him out.
She asked me out. She's the one that initiated it. She's the one that said,
oh, I like you. And he's like, well, you mean like your friends? You like your friends? And I was like, no, I like you. I was thinking about the relationship between Renault and Squall and how adorable it was and how forceful Renault was. And I wanted to be that because I didn't want to lose him either.
Such corny stuff to be saying on camera, dude.
I've played nearly all of the Final Fantasies since then, and they're all memorable and they're all attaching, but 8 has that part of my heart.
As a developer, when Final Fantasy VII came along, it kind of shocked me. People had been playing the games before and cared about the story, but I think Final Fantasy VII really changed people's perspective of what story meant to a gamer and their connection to the characters, you know, and when one of those characters dies, the emotional potential in game storytelling. And I think that kind of took me for a surprise. I wasn't really that kind of gamer. I wasn't heavily, I was a writer, and I didn't have a lot of sort of faith that people would care about narrative in games. And I think Final Fantasy VII showed very clearly that could be a driving force for people's interest in a game.
The first time I played Final Fantasy VII, I was like, oh, there's like a story and just the characters, and there's kind of like the Cloud was had like teen angst, which I was going through at that point in time in my life, and I just really related to it. It made every other game feel like a kid's game after that.
The first thing that really hit home for a lot of us as a gamer was that first opening cinematic. And that's the first time really like you see cinematic-esque moments like being portrayed in a game that's that kind of quality. You know, everything was 3D for RPG, which is new. And then it pulls you back to gameplay. And I think that immersion is the biggest thing.
The first game that I ever actually watched someone play and enjoyed watching them play it was Final Fantasy VII. I was at my buddy Chris's house, and I remember the music being really cool. And I was like, oh, you know, what's this game? So he's explaining it to me. And then they played the victory fanfare. And I don't know what happened to my mind, but like it was like someone just poured like orange Jolly Ranchers all over my body, and I just like couldn't contain it. Because of that victory fanfare, that's like, I saw him play for 20 minutes maybe. I went and I bought this game. I legit listened to it, just let it run for like an hour and a half, 2 hours. So first it was the music that I loved, and then the story on top of it. And to me, that's got the best character development of any game ever. And it took me to a completely different world that I'd never thought that I would experience through video games. So that is the game for me that really broke me in and told me, this is my life now.
These characters, even though they're like made up characters, they're still going through these struggles. That's one of the things for me, like I'm able to relate to back in my personal life and say, okay, like no matter what really happens, I can always really overcome if I need to.
I think losing myself in these stories with these great characters kind of just helped me cope with the everyday realities of, you know, being bullied and being around people who aren't really as, maybe as accepting. I was a nerd, and video games were, for me, gave me hope that there is something more out there than just getting bullied at school. Final Fantasy IX, the main character, Zidane, kind of goes through some major stuff toward the end of the game, and he feels like he's alone. And then there's this really, really beloved sequence by fans where really all of his friends, one by one, come to his aid and remind him that, hey, he's not alone, and there are other people out there like you, and it's gonna be okay. It kind of gives you a window into a different, kind of more accepting world in a way. Even though if it's not the real world, it still gives you some hope that things can be a little better when you get older and things like that.
I wanted to get a full sleeve tattoo, and I figured if I got a full sleeve tattoo of my favorite video game, it'd always remind me to be like young and a kid in heart and not take life and myself too seriously. If I ever needed my compass and whatever, I could just look down at my arm, and I was like, okay, that's my inspiration. Kind of get yourself back on track.
Can you walk us through it?
Yeah, sure. I have Cloud and Sephiroth from 7. I have Tidus, and kind of like a really emotional scene from Final Fantasy X with Yuna there, and then Aerith, Ares. I have Sephiroth down here as well. Spoiler alert, but he does something really bad to her. Genova, and then even Kingdom Hearts at the top here.
8 was the one that truly opened up, for me, my love for RPG. 10 was when I married the franchise. When I play Final Fantasy, I had to keep a journal. Like, I had to keep track of everything I did, every step I took. I have like 20 of these at home. People who play the franchise will understand there's so many things you do in that game, and you step away from it for 3 days and you'll forget what you last did because you've done so much between then and the last time you picked it up. Next time I play, I have to make sure I do this first, and I'll keep track of it, every little bit of it.
Common misconception that a lot of people have about the Final Fantasy series is that, frankly, we're up to 15. And when they want to start getting into the series, they say, which one do I start with? Which is the Final Fantasy game that I will play?
For people who don't know, they're like, well, do I have to play the first 14 games? And you have to explain to them, no, each game is a standalone title.
Each Final Fantasy game has a different kind of world.
And feel to it.
And the feel to it, you know, like the music, the characters, the world itself, like what's going on. But I think anybody, especially seeing like a new Final Fantasy game, it's all about brotherhood, it's all about like friendship, it's all about like sticking together and stuff. And I feel that it's a simple game for anybody to pick up.
So you can pick up Final Fantasy X and never have played Final Fantasy IX, 8, or 7. What will end up happening is you'll play Final Fantasy 15, you'll fall in love with the game, and then all of a sudden you're buying an old PlayStation 3 so that you can play 10 and 10-2 and 12 and 13, and you're just gonna fall in love with the franchise and backdate yourself because it's so different every time you play it.
Summons are looking...
Summons are crazy.
Yeah,
Summons
is really awesome.
It looks awesome. This game looks awesome. I feel like this is what would happen if me and 3 of my friends got sweet Final Fantasy magic powers. This is just like good brothers setting people on fire.
Like, I'm shaking a lot, and if you could zoom in on this, I have goosebumps, people. Like, I have chills. I seriously have chills right now. It's unreal.
This might be the Final Fantasy that kind of brings like a new wave of gamers to Final Fantasy like it did when I was younger. From everything that I saw, like I'm already in, and I was told that this game might challenge my love for Final Fantasy VII, which huge claim, but you never know.
I'm ready. Final Fantasy 15.
We're ready. We're both ready.
So ready for it.
Ready for it.